So what are the lessons you learned from your dad, and how can you apply that to being an awesome author? We'll show you that right after this. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your co-host, Scott, and joining us as usual is Chaffee Time Nguyen. How you doing, Chaffee?
Awesome. Frigid, cold in Chicago.
I'm in Ecuador, and it's warm, sunny. I'm across the street from the beach, and guess where I'm going as soon as we're done?
To Chicago to come over and keep me company.
It's no, I'm not going to keep you warm. It's been an interesting time. We're trying a new service, and of course I don't know how it works, which means that we're kind of learning which is why we're doing it. We want to try something new.
I forgot who said it, and a journey of 1,000 steps starts with one. So.
That's right. This is the second time I've used it, and I'm starting to see some of the issues. I mean, nothing is ever perfect. So having said all of that, this
That's
is
not
Books
true,
Cafe.
Scott. I'm perfect.
Yeah, present company excluded. This is Book Cafe, sponsored by free-ebooks.net. Head over there. You get 5 free ebooks every month, and membership is free. So head over there. Our purpose is to expose you, the reader, to new authors, and also to help new authors and established authors create communities and get their work out so that more and more people can do it. We have 220,000 visitors a week, so it's well worth your time putting a book up there if you're an author. And we've got over, I think, 60,000 books and over 10,000 audiobooks. So well worth your time to go over there and check them out. And so with that, because we're a little bit behind, I want to get us back on track, Chaffee. Our guest today is the host of Success Profiles Radio, and he's publisher of Success Profiles magazine. Over the last 6 years, he's interviewed world-class achievers such as Chaffee. No, not you yet, Chaffee, but you're on his list, I'm sure. Darren Hardy, Jack Canfield, Laurel Langenmeyer. I love Laurel. Kevin Harrington, I've never heard that name before, and many, many more. So with the lessons he's learned from these high achievers and through his own experience, he seeks to motivate and inspire others to become a greater version of themselves. He's the author of 3 books, including the new Success Profiles Conversations with High Achievers, and one that was just launched. I don't think it was even a month ago that we're going to be getting into. So with that, I'd like everybody to give a warm welcome to Brian K. Wright. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So we're excited to have you, Brian. And tell us a little bit about how you got into first of all, how you became a host of such a great radio show, Success Profiles, and what got you into actually writing books.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do something related to radio. I used to pretend that I was a DJ when the music was playing on the radio when I was a kid. And I've always been an avid reader, and I always have written stories. So figured writing and radio would be in my future somehow. I just didn't know what form it would take. And my 10-year anniversary show for Success Profiles Radio was about a week ago. So I've been doing this for a while, and I'm so
congratulations
for all the opportunities. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's been really wonderful. And I just enjoy writing, and I love sharing stories, and I love helping other authors share their stories. And so the newest book, The Greatest Lessons I Learned from My Dad, is a collaborative book between myself and 28 other people, including you, Scott. So thank you so much for being a part of this. It was a really fun project to undertake, and it came out in December. So very, very happy and grateful for that.
It was a fun project for me too, and it was an interesting project, right? Because for myself and for all the other co-authors, we really had to spend. I think well, I'll speak for myself. I really had to spend some time, you know, thinking back of things that I'd done with my dad and what sort of stood out, and I had never really thought of the idea of, like, well, what was his greatest lesson for me? And being an awful student, I'm sure, he taught it to me more than once. But it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. So
So, Brian, what this is the first collaborative author project you've worked on? Is that correct, or have you done
The first of its type. I've had several other collaborative book projects, but those have been with people who have been on my radio show, and so I would just take interviews from my radio show that were really fantastic and compile those. I've done some of those projects too, but this was the first time that I've done a book just like this. And working on the next one now, The Greatest Lessons I Learned from My Mom. So that's a fun project that people are pretty excited about too. So it's all about highlighting people's stories and sharing wisdom and encouraging and motivating and inspiring others to become the greatest version of themselves. That's really what I'm about.
I like that you used the word wisdom, and I was on a live stream earlier today, and my co-host used that word, and he what he said was, everyone's getting all this knowledge, but unless you also develop the wisdom to use the knowledge, it's not
Right.
really as effective as it could be. And I think we often don't think about. I mean, how often does anyone talk about wisdom, right? It's Gandalf.
Not very often.
Not very often, and we need a lot more wisdom in the world, I think.
Well, I spout a bunch of knowledge to my 13-year-old son, and he never does what I tell him. I don't know if that's just wisdom or him just blocking me out.
So, Brian, tell us about one of your favorite guests on your show.
Wow, I've had so many great ones. Darren Hardy, who was the publisher of Success Magazine for many years, was on my show several years ago, and that was such a fun show. He was very engaging. He shared a lot of great knowledge and wisdom. We talked about his book, The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster, and it was so fascinating to hear his perspective on hiring people. It was great to hear about his perspective on passion and a whole host of other topics. But, success doesn't happen in a straight line. And it was just really great to hear his ideas on all of this, because if you want to have a world-class organization, you need to not be afraid of hiring A players. And the only people who are going to hire A players are A people. If you're an A player and you're hiring B and C people, you're probably not going to do it because they just cause a lot of drama. So you need to have people in your organization that will quantum leap your business forward, and A players will do that because they will more than pay for themselves in the end. So Darren Hardy was a fantastic guest.
So, Brian, well, Scott's on mute, so I don't know what he's saying. Go ahead,
I'm in a
Scott.
noisy place, so I mute myself. But I was going to say, the idea of surrounding yourself with yes men or surrounding yourself with people who, are A players is such a huge choice that I think most people make subconsciously that totally impacts their business. That's a great point. So over to you, Chaffee.
Well, I was going to say, Brian, how do you start? I mean, congratulations on 10 years, by the way. That's fantastic. And where do you start? Like, if I'm brand new and I want to do something like you, how do I get all these, big name, the Darren Hardys and the big name people on my show? Or do I start with, the Chaffies and the Scotts upcoming in the world? Or how do you reach out to these people and say, hey,
I didn't start with those people. I had the advantage of attending business and personal development events before I started my show. And so I already had a network of people I could tap into. So I wasn't really starting from scratch, which was really awesome. My very first guest was Hal Elrod before The Miracle Morning was written and before that blew up. So he's been on my show 2 more times since then. And I'm just amazed at how his brand has just grown, and it's a movement that's taken over. And I'm just really, really proud of him. He's a really fantastic guest and a really, really great person. But he was my first guest. And I think you have great guests, and then you ask people who else do you know who might be interested in being on this show. And you get really good at interviewing, you provide a ton of value, you make the guest the star of your show, and it's all about that person. It's not about you. People are listening for the guest. They're not listening for you most of the time.
Well, you brought up a key point of just providing a ton of value. And I think sometimes, people are so busy trying to grow their business, trying to get out there, that they forget that just if you just share a ton of value and help a lot of people, you're going to get there. And I think that's a key point. Right, Scott?
It absolutely is.
I was going to jump in and say that, if you look at people that are successful, they were not as successful at one point in their life usually, and they grew into the success. Right. And then the people around them also grew into success, whether who influenced who the most and all the rest of it. But I mean, if you go back to the Rat Pack, right, Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., all those people, like, they came up together, right? You look at the people that were the stars in the 70s or 80s, or the people that are the stars now. And oftentimes there's this group of people that they all become successful together because they've created maybe a mastermind, or they work together, or whatever. And so what you said, Brian, before about you had this person on who was, before he wrote his book, before he became famous and everything else. And when that happens over time, like, we all kind of grow with that, right? And I think
that's right. Hal would have been nobody without you, Brian.
Oh, I don't know about that. He was already on a solid trajectory before I met him.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's you've surrounded yourself with some of these really cool guys and gals, and just I'm sure you've learned a ton of lessons from them. Tell us a little bit about, I know you've said you've taken some of the best ones and put them in some books. First of all, do you have that book, Scott? Can you share those books, those other books? And what are some of those lessons that you might have learned to share with the group here?
Well, I've got 2 of them right here.
Oh, wonderful.
Success Profiles, Conversations with High Achievers, Volume 1 and Volume 2. In Volume 2, Kevin Harrington was one of my featured guests. He was one of the original sharks on Shark Tank. And one of the topics we talked about was how to pitch a shark, and what a shark wants to hear and what a shark doesn't want to hear. And what's really interesting is sometimes when people pitch investors for money, they're looking for a lifeline, and people with that kind of wherewithal aren't looking to be your lifeline. They're not looking to be your last resort. They're looking for companies and ideas that are successful and on the upward swing. If you've screwed up your company and you are just looking for a lifeline, you're probably not going to find the kind of help that you're looking for from an investor, because they're not going to throw money at a sinking ship.
That's a great point, Brian. So you've got greatest lessons from your mom coming up. I got my chapter in a couple days ago, and so I'm excited to see that. And all my family, so I sent a copy of the greatest lessons from my dad to all my family and some friends, and they've given me rave reviews. And then there's one of my friends, he got it, and he says, yeah, I'm reading through it, I really like it. He posted on, I forget, somewhere on Facebook on one of my groups. And I said, well, yeah, but what did you think about my chapter? And he says, I haven't got to it yet. He says, that should have been the first chapter. He says, no, I'm building up to the crescendo.
Yes. Exactly. So, that's exactly the right answer.
It was. I thought, yeah, you bum.
Yeah.
My ego wanted to know that it was a good chapter, but So
It
what have
was.
you got planned? Oh, thank you. What have you got planned for after mom?
Well, this is going to be a series. I've got the domain for greatestlessonsbook.com. Haven't decided what I'm going to do after this one, but there will be more greatest lessons that we learned from fill in the blank. I'm sure there will be a greatest lessons I learned from my coach, greatest lessons I learned from my client, greatest lessons I learned from my brother or sister, maybe greatest lessons I learned from my pet. Lots of, I mean, we can learn from anyone and anything. So the
Right.
possibilities on this are endless.
Yeah, and I think you've hit a chord with a lot of people with this topic, right? Because
Thank you.
from the reader's perspective, obviously it's selling well, but also from your co-author's perspective, because we don't often get a chance to tell stories about our parents that nobody's ever heard.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
I'm
I
pretty
think,
sure that I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure that my story is something that I've never told anybody in the world ever. And then it was
yeah.
like, yeah, this is something that I should share. So thank you for giving me that platform.
You're welcome. And I think for some people, the struggle was, which story do I tell? And do I tell that story? What will someone think if I share that story? Well, you have to be at peace with it. You
Yes.
know, there's something to be said for sharing your truth. I know that when I shared some of my stories, I wrote down more than I used. I ended up redacting some of it because I couldn't think of a great way to spin some of it. But I love
Right.
what remained of what I wrote. So I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and it was just fantastic. In fact, literally 2 days before it went on Amazon, I wrote the closing chapter, which was a letter to my dad. And I had the
Um,
idea to do it. And I thought, I don't know if I should, but you know what? If I'm having resistance to it, it means that I must do it. So I did. And a couple of hours later, I spent probably 30 or 45 minutes writing that letter to my dad. And I cried when I was done. It was very emotional. And 2 days later, the book went on Amazon. So people told me that was probably the best part of it.
yeah, for sure.
Well, I gotta say,
Comes from the heart.
Scott actually sent me a copy of the book. So first of all, thank you, Scott. I think I've said that before. Only I'll say it again. Thank you for sending me a copy of the book. And I did, read. I started reading, and what I love about it is how you start the book, which is the motivation behind why you created the book in the first place, which is obviously what happened to your father. So my condolences there.
Thank you.
But what's wonderful about it is, and we've talked about this before, is that oftentimes, what happens to us in life, what happens to us in everyday situations, and what goes on is the motivation to actually write, is the motivation to do these kind of projects. And so, if you can take a second or a few moments, Brian, and just share the motivation behind the book, I think that would help inspire people as well.
Yeah. Well, my dad passed away in February last year. And so I knew after this that I would probably do something like this. I didn't know what it would look like. And I knew I wasn't going to be ready immediately. I needed to give myself some time to process and heal and figure out what I wanted to share. And it was about 6 months later, I shared with my Facebook group, Authorpreneur Live. I said, I have this idea for a book. I'd love a bunch of you to jump in and share your stories too. And 28 people jumped in and said yes, which I'm very happy and grateful for. And I love all the stories. I mean, all the stories are amazing in their own way. There's certainly no judgment over anything anyone shared. Some people had great relationships with their dads, some did not. But sometimes we learn who to be by observing who not to be from someone else. And sometimes that's the big lesson. It's like, I am not going to be the kind of parent that my dad was, for example. And I had a couple people in the book whose story was about that kind of thing. I'm very lucky that I ended well with my dad. We didn't always see eye to eye on things, but I did learn a lot, and I'm learning that I'm becoming a lot more like him all the time. And I guess I'm honored by that. There would have been a point in time where I've been, oh no, 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 I don't want to be like my dad. But no, there are character qualities that my dad had that I know that I've adopted, and I'm happy and grateful for it, because I don't let people disrespect me like they used to. And I just don't have time to waste with people who just aren't going anywhere in life.
Well, I think it's great that you use this as an outlet to, share your stories and share your feelings about your father. I would like to remind everybody that's listening is that you don't have to wait until something like this happens to share the feelings that you have with your friends and your family. And though this is a great way to embrace everything, I do believe that life is just too precious to wait on anything. So find out what's going on in your life, and maybe again write a story about it. Or what I love about this is that you just didn't write what your feelings were, or you just didn't write down a few stories. You shared this with other people and allowed them to share it as well. So not only yourself, you got 26 other people sharing these stories that will then get out there and help a ton of other people as well. So kudos for that. And great job there.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a huge blessing to be able to do this project.
Scott, you're muted again.
And usually I'm better at unmuting myself. Well, maybe I'm not, but when we're talking about dads and everything else, and because this book, I spent a fair bit of time, thinking about my life with my dad. But you said something, Chaffee, about you don't have to wait till they're gone to share the stories. My dad had a long death. He had leukemia, so we knew 10 years before, he was eventually going to be gone. And one day I was up in his den working away on my computer, and he was up in the den working away on his, paying the bills. And he was, so we're both kind of there, we're both being quiet, and he lets out this sigh, and I'm like, what's that all about? And he goes, oh, he says, and then he tells me this story of when I was a child, and he did something he wasn't proud of. And, remember when you were 10, blah, blah, blah. And I went up to him and put my hand on his shoulder, and I says, Dad, I have no clue what you're talking about. And he looked at me, because he'd held on to this for 40 or 50 years, right? And you know what? I still can't tell you what it was. Like, he told me, and I told him, I don't know what you're talking about. And to this day, I don't even remember what he said he thought he did. It was bad, right? And I says, when I was that age, you know what I remember? I remember playing in the front yard in our neighborhood, looking up and seeing you beat red and mad with these two little boys holding onto your legs for dear life, crying their eyes out. And now he looks at me, and I wonder now if I dreamt this, right? But he looks at me because he didn't really remember it. And he says, yeah, and their car was driving away. And what had happened was this man had driven up, he'd seen you, rolled down his window and said, do you know where something is? And my dad was answering, looks in the car, and he sees these two boys in the back seat with two dogs that are kind of gnawing on their ears. And he says, something's going on with your sons back there. And the guy says, oh, they're not my sons. Next thing you know, kids are out of the car, and my dad is giving this guy crap and madder than anything, and the guy drives off, right? They call them parents, and this was, in the 60s. It was like, oh, Dad, Mom, this man wants to take us get some candy. Okay, go ahead. And of course, he drove them, who knows, where from. And my dad rescued these two young boys. And I said, that's what I remember when I was 10. I have no clue what you're talking about. So we may be holding on to guilt that we're the only ones holding on to it, if you know what I mean.
Well, Scott, I don't need to read your chapter anymore because you just told me what your chapter was.
No, that was the second greatest lesson my dad ever taught me.
Got it.
You better read his chapter.
Go out there and read Scott's chapter. At least
if there's a volume 2, I'll write that story for volume 2. But
so what, Brian? What I guess, how did you come up with the thought process of, let me start with lessons from my dad? Oh, I should spin that off and do a whole series. Like, what was that thought process? And it just, how that thought.
It wasn't necessarily going to be a series to start with. I just wanted to honor my dad. and I thought other people might want to do the same. And after this book was close to being done, I thought, doing a mom book next is a natural progression. And then doing other books after this seems pretty natural too. So that's why it's going to be a series. And I think there's lessons to be learned from everyone and anything. And I just want to give people an opportunity to share those with people.
That's great. I wasn't sure if your mom said, saw the book and said, "Oh, where's my book?" No, I'm just kidding.
No. In fact, I haven't told her I was doing this one yet. It's a surprise.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Unless she's watching, in time for Mother's Day.
That's right. Just in time for Mother's Day.
That's exactly why we're doing this one now. I want it to be done before Mother's Day.
Awesome. My mom will be so happy.
Yes.
So, Brian, we're coming towards the end of our time together, and we often ask authors, what is one piece of advice that you would give to an up-and-coming author?
Just start writing. I think a lot of people are wondering whether the thing they have to say is good enough, whether their writing is good enough, whether their message is legitimate or valid or worth reading. I would just say, write, even if it's just for you. And then be bold and share it with someone. You might be pleasantly surprised at the reception that you get to your ideas and your writing. But just start writing, even if it's a journal every single day. You might find after a while, if you make a journal, if you make blogs, if you do Facebook Lives on a certain topic, you will find that that can be content for a book eventually. When I interviewed Jeffrey Gitomer on my show, he was my 100th episode. I asked him, when did you decide to write a book? And he says, I never really decided. I did a blog about all the stupid things that salespeople do. And when he had 100 entries, he realized he had a book. So it wasn't originally going to be a book, but he compiled a bunch of blogs about that around a singular topic. So if you've created content already around a certain area in business, personal development, or whatever, you might have enough content for the basis of a book. So critically look at the content that you've already created and see if there's something in there that you might be able to use or reuse. One of my clients repurposed a course into a book, and now we're using the book to steer people back to his course.
Beautiful. And before I forget, here is the, click the wrong button. Here is the link. So don't bother trying to write it down. It should be in the comments. Unless you're in a Facebook group, they won't let us put it in the comments, but I'll make sure it's in the description. So head over to Amazon and get this book. You'll get a lot out of it, regardless of whether you had a great or poor relationship with your dad. So Brian, thank you very much for being on. Really appreciate all that you do. And
you're welcome.
I'm now a published author thanks to you. So that's, I checked that off my list.
Yay.
And it wasn't painful at all. I was surprised how easy it was.
Good. I'm very glad.
And so Chaffee, any last words before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I just love the whole premise of this book and why you wrote it and everything else. So I just want to share with everyone out there is, again, when you're feeling things, when things are going on in your life, instead of just bottling it up inside and holding it, as Scott said, for 40 years, one of the best things you could do is talk to other people about it and share your experiences. And the more that you share it, you'll find out that other people are probably going through the same situation or the same thing and can find motivation from your story. And so, again, one of the best ways of doing that is either a radio show, a podcast like this, or a book or a blog, and just getting that information out there and sharing with people provides value to their life. Whether you do that for that reason or not, it's just putting your emotions out there. And when you open yourself up, that's when the miracles occur. That's when you start moving forward and instead of just being shut down and locked up in your own little world. So get out there and share, whether, like I said, it's a blog, a book, whatever it is. Just don't hold things inside.
Exactly.
Well said, Chaffee. So once again, Brian, thank you very much. Really appreciate having you on the show. And Chaffee, excellent job as usual. Everybody, we appreciate you. We love you. And see you all next week. Bye for now.
Bye bye. Thanks, Brian.